I remember it was probably my 8th or 9th week. It was getting close to the termination of my 10-week period of employment that they'd mentioned. And I remember Ridley Scott walking into John Rogers, the unit manager, and saying, I want to keep this young man a little bit longer. And that's when I knew I was there. Voigt-Kampff. This is Sid Mead's original drawing. And this is what it ended up looking like. Ridley said, how are you going to finish this? And I said, I'm going to paint this with kind of World War I German lozenge camouflage. He didn't make a comment. And I said, but I'm going to do it in metallics so it really pops out. And then I'm going to go over it with a disgusting wash age on the whole vehicle to indicate all the slime that's coming down from the atmosphere. He wouldn't say anything other than, okay. How do you refuel the spinners? Well, here's one with the spinner coming in and the aerial fueler sticks the pump in the tank and fills it up. And here's the hootie that pulls it around, and here's the gas. I'm just coming up with this stuff. There's nothing in the script about it. I'm just generating stuff for Ridley. Leon's gun was something that the prop people were supposed to find. And they kept offering things to Ridley, and Ridley wasn't satisfied. So I went home, next day brought in a bunch of magazines with various guns to suggest, including this magazine. He looked at that and said, get it, let's do it. No other gun that any of us had ever seen had 4 barrels on it. So it became a very unique, one-off gun. I would show the workers how it was supposed to look. We would select foam pieces together. I would start to work on a mock-up with them. There's retrofit on the top. There's retrofit on the side. I was trying to carry the themes from the body of the movie, i.e. with the buildings and everything else, into the vehicles. I was taking care of this street fixture, that street fixture. I was providing all of the foam pieces to go on applique on the buildings. And basically the set designers were working my pieces out to suit Larry Paul's vision of Sid Mead's paintings. This is basically what we started off with, and it doesn't look a bit like the thing in the movie, but topologically it's the same. We can see angles, we can see arms that rotate, we can see the optical head. The little eyepiece here that you looked into, the glowed red, they were actually part of a Norelco razor blade, the shaver heads, and we use these as the part of the focusing lens from the Voigt-Kampff machine. Here's a close-up I took from the video screen to get some of the details. The surface was actual powdered graphite, so the surface was really delicate. You touch it with your finger, there'd be a fingerprint. So the whole thing constantly had to be dressed and worked with. It was a very delicate machine. It had to be treated with kid gloves, and people were a little bit rougher with it than they might have been. And it didn't last as long as it should have, but it did what it had to do, and it made a very important impact on the movie. These are just devices. See, this is a device. Stuff to be in the background, the sort of things that we might have seen in the background at Deckard's apartment. Deckard's apartment was interesting because it had such lowered ceilings, and it was such a, as the Victorians called it, a horror of the vacuum. That the Victorians are noteworthy for putting decoration on the walls and elaborate paintings and elaborate things. Well, this was the same way. It was beautifully decorated. The pictures as the camera moved across the piano and the texture. That's the one thing I can say about Blade Runner. It's probably got the best texture of any movie I've ever been involved with. The textile blocks were one of Frank Lloyd Wright's kind of signature items, and Innes house was covered with them. An agreement was made that we could copy them, and yet every copy simply had to be cataloged and had a serial number. And when it was all over and we took the sets apart, we struck the sets at the end of the shoot, every single one of those panels had to be identified and returned. The funny thing about the drive-up is the car couldn't run because the person who had bought the engines, the Volkswagen engines, had got engines that didn't work. So the car is being towed into the picture frame, and you can notice the rope towing the car in, much like the wires that hang the spinners before they took them out with visual effects processing. The motorcycle. This is based on a BMW, but we actually had Harley Davidsons. But it's kind of designed like a World War II Messerschmitt fighter plane with an armored windshield and things. I would come back in the evenings on my own and watch the production. I became a fly on the wall, and it was fascinating. And one of the most interesting was the final shot of Batty and Deckard on the roof. And one of the nice things, my contribution to that, is those big horizontal pieces with holes in them are actually radar sweeps from those old constellations that have these big radar screens in their belly. But a lot of this stuff never made it to the camera, although this is the beginning of what we saw were the parking meter fixtures, which would give you a fatal shock of electricity if you tried to tamper with it. Ridley Scott, as a leader of the pack, it was never equaled. And I still keep having my eyes open and my perceptions deepened because of the way he sees things and presents them to us. Show me something I haven't ever seen before. And that's what we had to do. That's what Larry Paul and his art department staff had to do. That's what I had to do. That's what Jordan Cronenweth had to do. We all had to come up with fresh visions to measure up to Ridley because his expectations were so high. And I personally was drawn up behind them. And I hope other people were too.